There are nights at sea when passengers remember the journey because of a beautiful sunset, a spectacular port, or a perfect dinner. And then there are nights they remember because the ocean suddenly becomes something completely different. On January 13, 2017, the passengers aboard AIDAprima were expecting an ordinary final night of their winter cruise. Hamburg was ahead, the end of the voyage was approaching, and the ship was making her way through the North Sea. But outside, Storm Egon was building into a powerful winter system, with winds reaching force 10 on the Beaufort scale. By the time AIDAprima reached the waters near the German coast, around 9 p.m., the sea was no longer simply rough. It was violent. Waves up to 7 meters high sent furniture sliding across the decks, spilled pool water straight into the bar area, shattered glasses, and left 3 passengers injured. As people inside the ship struggled to understand what was happening, the bridge crew made a decision that would change the final hours of the voyage. Instead of holding a straight course toward Hamburg, Captain Jens Januszek altered the ship's heading toward Helgoland, presenting less surface area to the storm. It worked. Conditions on board began to settle soon after. This is the story of that night, when a modern cruise ship discovered just how quickly a relaxing vacation could turn into a fight against the North Sea. AIDAprima is the flagship of AIDA Cruises, a German cruise line based in Rostock and part of the larger Costa Crociere and Carnival Corporation family. She's a floating resort, built specifically to appeal to the German-speaking market. Casual, colorful, and packed with entertainment. The ship can carry up to roughly 3,300 passengers at a time, supported by a crew of around 900 people keeping everything running. By January 2017, AIDAprima had settled into a route that would become her signature, the so-called Metropolitan route, or Metropolitan Cities cruise. It's a weekly loop departing from Hamburg, calling at Southampton in England, Le Havre in France, Zeebrugge in Belgium, and Rotterdam in the Netherlands, before looping back to Hamburg to swap out passengers and start again. It's a route that hugs the coastlines of the English Channel and southern North Sea. Beautiful in summer, but brutally exposed to winter storms rolling in off the Atlantic. And winter storms were exactly what the ship's officers were watching that January. Days before the ship even reached the final leg of her journey, weather warnings were already stacking up. The port call in Zeebrugge had to be scrapped entirely, canceled in advance because forecasters could see a dangerous storm system developing over the North Sea. The bridge crew made another call too. Instead of departing from Rotterdam at the originally scheduled time, they pushed the departure earlier, casting off at midnight in an attempt to get ahead of the worst of the weather and reach the shelter of the Elbe River before the storm fully arrived. It wasn't enough. The storm, which meteorologists were calling Egon, was moving faster and hitting harder than the ship could outrun. On the night of Friday, January 13, 2017, rolling into the early hours of Saturday the 14th, Storm Egon slammed into the AIDAprima as she crossed the open North Sea on her final stretch toward Hamburg. German tabloid Bild reported wave heights reaching around 23 feet, roughly 7 meters, crashing against a ship that, just months earlier, had been christened as AIDA's brand new flagship. Inside, the scene turned chaotic fast. The ship began rolling harder than most passengers had ever experienced. Captain Januszek gave the order. Everyone was to return to their cabins immediately. But on a ship pitching and rolling in 7-meter swells, even walking a straight line down a corridor became a genuine struggle. Some passengers, in a mix of instinct and panic, strapped on their life jackets and moved through the hallways wearing them, which, ironically, only added to the sense of alarm for other guests who hadn't yet grasped what was happening. One eyewitness, speaking afterward to Bild, described people losing their footing, seeing others injured, and passengers slipping into outright panic around her. She said plainly that it felt like being aboard the Titanic. Behind the scenes, the storm was leaving real damage. Furniture shifted, glassware and dishware smashed across floors in public areas, and the sheer force of the rolling ship caused several injuries among the passengers on board. In total, 3 guests were hurt. 2 suffered bruising and contusions from being thrown against furniture or walls, and one passenger sustained an actual bone fracture. The ship's medical team treated the injured on board first, stabilizing them as the vessel continued to fight through the swells. AIDA's official position, delivered by a company spokesperson once the ship reached port, was firm. The vessel was never in danger and remained safe throughout the entire ordeal. According to the company, the crew moved quickly to clean up and repair the visible effects of the storm: the broken glass, the displaced furniture, the flooded patches of walkway, well before passengers disembarked. Captain Janaszek and his bridge team ultimately steered AIDAprima safely into the mouth of the Elbe River and onward into the port of Hamburg. Once docked, the injured passengers were transferred off the ship and taken to a hospital in Hamburg for further treatment. For a vessel that size, powering through hurricane-adjacent swells and complete darkness on the open North Sea, the outcome could have been far worse. But for the roughly 3,300 passengers and 900 crew members who lived through that night, it was an experience they wouldn't soon forget. Looking back at online discussions from passengers who were actually on board, opinions on how the crew handled it were surprisingly forgiving. Many veteran cruisers pointed out that anyone booking a North Sea crossing in the dead of winter has to accept that storms are simply part of the deal. The sea doesn't check anyone's itinerary. Some questioned whether departing Rotterdam even earlier, well ahead of midnight, might have let the ship dodge the worst of Egon entirely and reach the safety of the Elbe before the storm system fully matured. But most agreed that once the ship was committed to that stretch of open water, there wasn't much left to do except ride it out, and that the captain's call to send everyone to their cabins probably prevented far worse injuries than the 3 that were reported. In October 2023, a storm system packing winds up to force 10 forced AIDAprima to abandon the Geiranger Fjord early and change her Norwegian itinerary on the fly. Instead of continuing on to Ålesund and Stavanger as planned, the ship sheltered overnight in Flåm, at the end of the Arlandsfjord, before heading directly for Hamburg the next day. Ålesund and Stavanger were dropped from the route entirely. In August 2025, a similar situation played out further south along the Norwegian coast. A scheduled call at Kristiansand had to be swapped at the last minute for the more sheltered fjord town of Eidfjord, after weather conditions made it too risky to approach the original port. Then, in the autumn of 2025, Storm Joshua hit, while AIDAprima was running her channel route. The scheduled stop in Zeebrugge was scrapped, and with reported gusts reaching force 12 on the Beaufort scale, the ship instead spent 2 extra days docked in Le Havre, waiting for conditions to ease. The same storm system had already cut short a Norwegian cruise for her sister ship, AIDAprima. Taken together, it paints a picture of a ship, and really an entire class of vessels running Northern European winter routes that lives in a near-constant negotiation with the sea. Modern engineering, weather routing technology, and experienced captains mean that outright disaster is rare. But as the passengers aboard AIDAprima learned firsthand on that January night in 2017, when a North Sea storm decides to show up uninvited, even a state-of-the-art flagship can end up feeling like something out of a century-old maritime legend. Storm Egon came and went in a matter of hours. For everyone who lived through it in their cabins, life jackets strapped on, listening to glass shatter somewhere down the corridor, it's a night they still remember.